On Tuesday, February 25th, a session of the Oklahoma Senate transformed into a spontaneous Bible study, or perhaps more of a Bible study cosplay, demonstrating how not to read the Bible. Specifically, how not to read the Book of Proverbs. Now, before we get to the problem, let's set the stage. State Senator Dave Rader, a Republican in Tulsa, who is also the former longtime head football coach at the University of Tulsa, introduced a bill to ban public schools from using corporal punishment against children with disabilities. The U.S. Supreme Court actually ruled in 1977 that schools could use corporal punishment and left it to the states to establish rules for its use or to ban it. In 2017, Oklahoma lawmakers passed a ban on using corporal punishment on children with significant cognitive disabilities. Federal statistics showed that 20% of the corporal punishment incidents at the time were against children with disabilities, though only some were then protected by the 2017 legislation. That law came about after a state lawmaker learned that his deaf nephew had been whacked by a teacher who was upset that he had not listened to her command to stop doing something, even though the deaf child had not heard the command and did not understand why he had been hit. During the COVID-19 pandemic year of 2020 to 2021, the Oklahoma Department of Education expanded the ban on corporal punishment to bar its use against any children with disabilities, not just those with the most significant disabilities. However, since it is just a department rule, it can easily be rescinded. Thus, Senator Rader wants to codify that ban to ensure that it remains in place to protect any student covered by the federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Among the disabilities he wants added to the list, and thus would shield children from receiving corporal punishment in schools, are autism, deafness, visual impairment, and intellectual disability. An effort for such a ban last year passed the state Senate, but then died in the House. At the time, Rader praised his fellow senators for having recognized that there is no need for schools to use corporal punishment to discipline disabled students. He added, "The support of fellow senators for backing this important bill that protects some of our most vulnerable children is most appreciated." With a new legislative session, Rader is again pushing such a bill, which is an important step. Although I would support a full ban to prevent school teachers or officials from using corporal punishment on any student. Rader's legislation, Senate Bill 364, came to the Senate floor yesterday for discussion. And that's when another senator got confused and thought he was in a Bible study. Republican Senator Shane Jett, a Southern Baptist, has been one of the most outspoken critics of the legislation to ban the use of corporal punishment against children with disabilities. During discussion of the bill on the Senate floor on Tuesday, he repeatedly pressed Senator Rader to justify the bill in light of some Bible verses.
How does the author of this bill, Mr. President, align this legislation that unilaterally takes away a parent's ability to collaborate with the school, to exercise corporal punishment? And again, that is not beating. It's disingenuous to say corporal punishment is beating a child, and certainly not hitting him in the face with a fist, as my Twitter feed will light up later. How does the author of this bill align this legislation with Proverbs 22:15 that says, "Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him"?
Rader, a Southern Baptist deacon and Sunday school teacher, wasn't going to, as Proverbs 26:4 teaches, answer a fool according to his folly. Rejecting the premise that the bill should align with Jett's interpretation of a Bible verse, Rader instead offered a little hermeneutical lesson about what that rod of discipline meant.
I think a week, 2 weeks from yesterday, OIE will take place once again. And if you go watch that, you'll see the handlers of pigs use a rod to discipline their pigs. and they tap them on either side to make sure the pig goes on the straight line, straight and narrow if you want to, going where they're supposed to go. That's a rod we're talking about. Because, there are going to be times when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and we won't have to fear evil. Because your rod and your staff comfort me.
Angered by the response, Jet then compared his fellow Southern Baptist Republican to Satan before returning to another proverb.
I recall that Satan quoted scriptures on the temptation of Christ. We should rightly divide the word of truth. Let's take a look at Proverbs 23:13-14. How does the author align this bill that prohibits parents from using every tool that is legal and appropriate in conjunction with the public schools? How do you align it with Proverbs 23:13-14 that says, do not withhold discipline from your child. If you punish them with a rod, they will not die. That's not a tap on either side of a shoulder like a pig. Punish them with a rod and save them from death. How does the author, Mr. President, align with this scripture and this legislation?
Jet's reference to Satan questioning Jesus by quoting scripture was ironic, because if we take the passage literally, it would best apply to Jet. After all, he was the one first quoting scripture as he asked questions of Rader. Now, I'm not suggesting Jet is like Satan. I'm just noting the logical flaw in his self-righteous attack on his fellow senator. Rader, for his part, did not take the bait, and again refused to justify his bill according to a literalistic reading of a couple of verses from the Book of Proverbs. Instead, he encouraged his colleague to join him in going to meet teachers who work with children with disabilities, so Jet could see how they use other ways of guiding and disciplining those children.
So what we're saying in this bill is if there are special needs, then there will be special discipline. And we're saying in our state, we just don't think it should be corporal punishment. That's what this law says.
Unsatisfied, Jet repeated his effort to force a theological defense of this secular bill.
But my question remains, how does the author of this bill rectify or bring congruent with Proverbs 23:13 that says, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with a rod, they will not die. Punish them with a rod and save them from death. And the author cited that they are different, but in Scripture it's uniformly applied to everyone. Is there a different application of salvation? If you have a hearing aid, there's a difference for you. If you have eyeglasses, it's different from you. Don't talk about IEPs, because that's not what this bill covers. It's a subset. It's all disabilities. Here's another one. Proverbs 29:17. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace, and they'll bring you delight, and delights you desire. In our classrooms, how are we going to maintain discipline so that our teachers can teach academics if we have this disparate way of disciplining children? You can't discipline this one because of this reason or that. How do we rectify a fundamental philosophical departure from Western culture and civilization to this ideology that says you cannot apply discipline, and we're doing it unilaterally from this body in defiance of parental rights or a parental role? How do you justify that?
Members, if I may, reminder, we are in a posture of questioning. Debate will come next. Let us ask our questions and answer our questions directly, please.
Thank you for the question. I answered it previously.
The debate then moved on to more substantive discussions about the bill, and it passed the Senate 31-16. Now, I want to note that Senator Jet made two significant problems with his line of questioning. First, he's clearly working from a position of Christian nationalism. That is, he believes that Oklahoma's lawmakers should govern and vote according to his interpretation of the Bible. But that's not the oath of office he or the rest of the senators took. His job is not to codify his religion, but to serve all of the people of his state. The second problem is that he does not seem to understand how to read and interpret the Book of Proverbs. That's ironic, since he's literally trying to codify his interpretation of the Bible, even though it's one that serious Bible scholars reject. Jet's problem is he does not understand the genre of the Book of Proverbs. That book is not a bunch of absolute commands from God. Rather, it's a collection of wisdom sayings, of things that are generally true. Conservative Old Testament scholar Tremper Logman III explained this well in his book, How to Read Proverbs. Logman noted that the various proverbs in the book are not always true. As an example, he pointed to Proverbs 10:1. A wise child brings joy to a father. A foolish child brings grief to a mother. While it is generally true that parents will delight in wise children and be distraught by foolish ones, that is not always true. Logman wrote, "We can all think of many instances when we might question this assertion. Imagine an abusive alcoholic father or a self-absorbed mother who neglects her children. Are the lines of authority between parent and child so dominant that it does not matter what selfish, destructive impulses a parent has? The mother or the father has to be pleased no matter what? Of course not. It is clear that the father and mother are understood to be wise themselves. Their desires would be for the good of the child and for the furtherance of wisdom. This proverb is not insisting on an absolute law. It is rather putting forward a generally true principle that depends on the right time and circumstances." Logman added, "To read a proverb as if it were always true in every circumstance is to commit a serious error. We call it the error of genre misidentification. The proverb form, no matter the cultural background, presupposes the right circumstances for its proper application." That's the mistake Senator Jett made. He literally argued that Proverbs 23:13-14 applies to all children, but it's not always true. There are some children who have literally died from being punished with a rod. More significantly, there are children who have been punished with a rod and then still turned out to be undisciplined individuals, or who died from foolish mistakes, or who died from a disease or an accident. The proverbs that Jett quoted are literally not always true, but he insists on reading them as if they are and demanding the state of Oklahoma codify his inaccurate interpretation. And if someone disagrees, he suggests they are like Satan, or as he argued last year, that they are defying Scripture. While the bill did again pass the Senate, it remains to be seen if it can become law this year. The invoking of Proverbs has helped kill the bill in the House the last couple of years. As Republican Representative John Talley, an ordained minister who has pushed this legislation, noted in 2023, he thought it failed in part because several people were a little nervous about voting for it because they thought they were voting against the Bible. So let's be clear. The Book of Proverbs does not mandate that public schools use corporal punishment against children. The Book of Proverbs does not mandate that school teachers use a rod to beat the backsides of autistic children or those with other disabilities. To read the text so literally is to not take it seriously, according to its own genre and intentions of its own authors. Oklahoma lawmakers like Senator Jett, who quote the Book of Proverbs to justify their Christian nationalistic policies, do violence against Scripture to justify doing violence against the least of these.